The day the sky burned. The children were singing when the ships arrived. It was a warm afternoon in the Valley of Seven Rivers, where the Harmony Refuge stood surrounded by wildflower meadows and ancient oak trees. Inside the stone and glass building, 43 children between the ages of 5 and 12 sat in a circle, their voices rising in a traditional Earth song about stars and dreams. Their caretaker, an elderly woman named Mira Chen, smiled as she listened, her weathered hands folded in her lap. For 3,000 years, this had been Earth's reality. Peace so complete that the very concept of violence had become abstract, something studied only in history archives. The children growing up in places like Harmony Refuge knew nothing of weapons or war. They learned music, science, art, and compassion. They believed the universe was fundamentally good. Then the sky split open with thunder. The first Dravik harvester descended through the clouds like a falling mountain, its hull black as obsidian and marked with symbols that spoke of conquest across 1,000 worlds. The ship was 3 kilometers long, bristling with drilling equipment designed to tear through planetary crust and extract the precious cryon energy that flowed beneath Earth's surface. Behind it came 6 more vessels, each one casting shadows that turned day into twilight. In the capital city of New Geneva, Earth's High Council watched in stunned silence as their attempts at communication went unanswered. High Director Amara Lorne, a woman of 62 years with silver hair and eyes that had never seen cruelty, stood before the viewscreen and tried once more. Unknown vessels, this is Earth's High Council. We welcome peaceful contact. Please respond and state your intentions. Silence. The Dravik had no interest in dialogue. They had conquered 473 civilizations across the Orion Arm. They took what they wanted. Resistance was crushed. Compliance was expected. And Earth, with its vast cryon deposits and its population that had forgotten how to fight, seemed like the easiest harvest in centuries. The lead ship descended toward the Valley of Seven Rivers. Mira Chen saw it first through the refuge's great windows. The children's song faltered as the massive shadow fell across the meadow. Some of the younger ones began to cry. Mira moved quickly, her training kicking in even though that training had never prepared her for this. She activated the building's alert system and began guiding children toward the underground shelters that every Earth structure contained, relics from an age when humanity had feared such things. Stay calm, little ones, she said, her voice steady despite the fear blooming in her chest. We're going to play a game. Everyone to the lower level. Quickly now, but carefully. The children moved in an orderly line, holding hands as they'd been taught. But there were so many of them, and the stairs were narrow, and the youngest ones were frightened and slow. Mira stayed at the back, counting heads, making sure no one was left behind. Outside, the Dravik harvester landed with an impact that shook the earth. Massive drilling arms unfolded from its belly, each one tipped with plasma cutters capable of slicing through rock like paper. The ship's commander, a Dravik officer named Vex-Lar, reviewed the scan data with cold efficiency. The cryon deposit ran directly beneath this valley. The structure in the way, this primitive building, was irrelevant. He issued the order to begin drilling. The first arm descended toward the meadow, and as it did, proximity alarms detected the building. A junior officer pointed this out to Vex-Lar, noting that life signs indicated the presence of small beings, possibly young. Irrelevant, Vex-Lar said. We harvest on schedule. If they are still present when drilling begins, that is their failure, not ours. The drilling arm activated, its plasma tip glowing white-hot. The sound was like reality tearing, a scream of tortured air that made the refuge's walls vibrate. Mira was halfway down the stairs with the last group of children when she heard it. She looked back through the doorway and saw the glowing point of light descending toward the building's eastern wing. Run, she shouted, abandoning calm. Run now. The children ran. But they were children, and they were frightened, and some stumbled on the stairs while others froze in panic. Mira grabbed 2 of the youngest and carried them, her old heart hammering, her breath coming in gasps. Behind her, she could hear the terrible whine of the plasma cutter growing louder. The drill touched the building's eastern wall at exactly 3:47 in the afternoon, Earth Standard Time. The plasma met the structure's foundation, which had been built over a natural gas pocket that the builders had carefully sealed and reinforced 3 centuries ago, following every safety protocol Earth's peaceful society demanded. The explosion lit up the valley like a second sun. Mira Chen made it to the shelter door with the 2 children in her arms. She pushed them through to safety. Then the shockwave hit, and the world became fire and noise and darkness. When the smoke cleared, the eastern third of Harmony Refuge was gone. 43 children had been inside. 18 made it to the shelter. 25 did not. Mira Chen's body was found in the doorway, her arms still extended toward the children she had saved. In New Geneva, High Director Amara Lorne received the report in silence. Around her, council members wept openly, their 3,000 years of peace unable to prepare them for this moment. On screens across Earth, citizens watched the footage with expressions of disbelief that slowly hardened into something the planet had not seen in millennia. Amara's hands trembled as she closed the report. Then she stood, her voice cutting through the grief like a blade. "Open the vaults," she said quietly. "All of them. It's time to remember what we chose to forget." The counselors stared at her in shock. "Open the vaults," Amara repeated, and this time her voice carried the weight of 3,000 years of suppressed fury. "We tried peace. Now we'll try something older." Across Earth, in hidden places beneath mountains and oceans, ancient locks began to turn. Humanity was waking up. And the universe was about to remember why our ancestors had scared the stars themselves. The awakening of wrath. The vaults had been sealed for 3,000 years, but their locks still turned smoothly. Beneath the Himalayas, massive doors of reinforced titanium slid open for the first time since the Great Peace Accord. Inside, rows of spacecraft hung suspended in preservation fields, their hulls unmarked by time. These were not exploration vessels or cargo haulers. These were warships, sleek, deadly machines designed by ancestors who had known that survival sometimes required fangs. Dr. Marcus Webb stood at the entrance to Vault 7, his historian's mind struggling to process what his eyes were seeing. He was 47 years old and had spent his entire career studying humanity's violent past from the safety of archive footage. Now he walked among the physical remnants of that era, and the scale of it stole his breath. "We built all this," he whispered. Beside him, General Sarah Kovac nodded slowly. She had been pulled from retirement 3 days ago, one of the few people on Earth who still held a military rank, even if it had been ceremonial for decades. Her grandmother had been among the last generation to serve in active combat before the Great Peace. Now, at 71 years old, Sarah found herself standing in an armory that could equip 1,000,000 soldiers. "We built this and more," Sarah said, running her hand along the hull of a fighter craft. "Our ancestors knew that forgetting how to fight and choosing not to fight are 2 different things. They chose the latter. They never forgot the former." Around them, engineering teams moved through the vault with scanner equipment, documenting everything. The ships were functional, hibernating, not dead. The weapons were intact. The manufacturing specifications were stored in quantum crystals that had suffered no degradation. Everything humanity had learned about war in 10,000 years of bloody history had been preserved, waiting for the day it might be needed again. That day had come. On the surface, Earth's transformation was accelerating. High Director Amara Lorne had addressed the planet 6 hours after the Harmony Refuge massacre, and her words had ignited something that peaceful centuries could not extinguish. The speech was simple, delivered without dramatics, but every person who heard it felt the same cold fire kindle in their hearts. "They came to our home," Amara had said, standing before cameras with her eyes red from weeping but her voice steady. "They ignored our welcome. They murdered our children. They called it collateral damage." She paused, and in that pause, 3,000 years of pacifism cracked like glass. "We will show them what damage truly means." The response was immediate and universal. Across Earth's cities, towns, and villages, people volunteered by the millions. They lined up outside newly opened recruitment centers, their faces set with a determination that would have been unrecognizable to their parents. These were farmers, teachers, artists, and scientists, people who had never held a weapon, never imagined they would need to. But they had all seen the footage from the Valley of 7 Rivers. They had all counted the small bodies being pulled from the rubble. 25 children. 25 futures erased by an empire that didn't even bother to learn their names. In the North Atlantic, the ocean began to churn. Massive structures rose from the depths, shedding 3 millennia of sediment and marine growth. These were the shipyards of old Earth, built during humanity's last great conflict and then flooded deliberately when peace came. The automated systems activated smoothly, their quantum processors picking up work they had abandoned thousands of years ago. Within a week, the first new warship would begin construction. Within a month, Earth would have a fleet. But building ships was only part of the equation. Humanity needed soldiers, and a population that had never known violence needed to learn fast. That responsibility fell to people like Commander James Liu, a martial arts instructor who had studied historical combat techniques as a hobby. Now he stood in a training facility outside Beijing, looking at 5,000 volunteers who had arrived that morning. They ranged in age from 18 to 60. Some were athletic, others were not. All of them shared the same expression, a mixture of grief, determination, and barely controlled rage. James had seen that look before, in historical footage of soldiers preparing for righteous war. His ancestors had called it the look of people who had found something worth fighting for. "I won't lie to you," James told them, his voice carrying across the assembly hall. "Most of you will never fire a shot in anger. Modern warfare is about technology, coordination, and logistics. But all of you need to understand what we're preparing to do. We're not seeking conquest. We're not building an empire. We're teaching the galaxy a lesson it should never have needed." He paused, letting his words sink in. "You don't harm human children. Not ever. Not without consequences that echo across stars." The training began that day. It was brutal not because the instructors were cruel, but because there was no time for gentle learning. The Dravik were still on Earth, their harvesters drilling in 3 locations, extracting cryon with mechanical efficiency while their warships hung in orbit, daring humanity to respond. They thought Earth was helpless. The Dravik had monitored human communications for weeks before landing, noting the absence of military chatter, weapons testing, or aggressive posturing. They had concluded that humanity was exactly what it appeared to be, a peaceful, advanced civilization that had evolved beyond violence. They were half right. Humanity had evolved beyond casual violence, beyond war for resources or pride or territorial expansion. But the Dravik had made a fundamental error in their assessment. They had assumed that the absence of violence meant the absence of the capacity for violence. In his command ship orbiting Earth, Dravik Fleet Commander Torvan reviewed the latest reports with satisfaction. The cryon extraction was proceeding ahead of schedule. The native population had done nothing but file formal protests through diplomatic channels. A few had gathered in peaceful demonstrations near the drilling sites, holding signs and singing songs. Songs against an empire that had burned worlds. Torvan dismissed his officers and settled into his command throne, already composing the report he would send to the Dominion's High Council. Earth would be listed as a Category 1 annexation, total compliance, zero resistance. His career would benefit significantly from such an efficient conquest. He never noticed the small objects launching from Earth's surface. They were too small, too slow, too primitive-looking to register as threats on Dravik sensors designed to detect plasma torpedoes and quantum missiles. They looked like exploration satellites, the kind that peaceful civilizations launched to study their own orbit. By the time Torvan's sensors officer realized what they actually were, 300 of them had spread across near-Earth space, forming a network of relay stations, sensor platforms, and weapons platforms disguised as scientific equipment. Humanity's trap was closing. The Dravik just didn't know it yet. In New Geneva, Amara Lorne stood in the strategic command center that had been built beneath the city in the last 72 hours. Around her, displays showed the locations of every Dravik ship, every drilling site, every military asset the Empire had deployed to Earth. Former scientists and engineers now wore the uniforms of a reborn defense force, their peaceful expertise repurposed for war. "How long until we're ready?" Amara asked quietly. General Kovac studied the tactical displays. 2 weeks for full fleet deployment. But we can strike with what we have now if necessary. Amara shook her head. No. We do this right. We do this once. And when we're done, every species in this galaxy will know the price of harming human children. She turned to face the assembled officers, and her eyes held the cold fire that was spreading across Earth like wildfire. We're not just fighting the Dravik. We're sending a message that will outlive this empire. Let them keep drilling. Let them think they've won. When we strike, it won't be a battle. Her voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more weight than a shout. It will be an extinction event. The price of children's blood. The attack began at dawn, Earth Standard Time, exactly 14 days after the Harmony Refuge massacre. Fleet Commander Torvan was reviewing extraction reports when every system on his command ship died simultaneously. Lights, gravity, weapons, shields, life support, everything went dark in the span of a single heartbeat. Through the viewport, he saw the same thing happening across his entire fleet. 47 Dravik warships, each one a masterpiece of Imperial engineering, became nothing more than drifting metal tombs. The Dravik had conquered hundreds of worlds with their technology. They had never encountered humanity's true gift, not weapons or ships or tactics, but the ability to innovate under pressure, to turn anything into an advantage, to find solutions where none should exist. The kill code that paralyzed the Dravik fleet had been written by a 17-year-old girl named Maya Patel, who 3 weeks ago had been studying quantum computing theory at university. She had volunteered the day after seeing footage of the dead children being carried from the ruins. Working with a team of former civilian programmers, she had analyzed every communication the Dravik ships had transmitted, found the patterns in their network protocols, and crafted a virus that spread through their systems like wildfire. The Dravik ships weren't destroyed. They were simply stopped. Every crew member sat in darkness, their weapons useless, their engines dead, waiting for whatever came next. What came next rose from Earth like a swarm of silver locusts. The fleet that lifted from Earth's oceans, mountains, and hidden shipyards numbered 300 vessels. They weren't as large as Dravik warships, and their weapons weren't as sophisticated. But they had been built with 3,000 years of accumulated knowledge and 2 weeks of focused rage. Every ship carried crews who had trained day and night, who had pushed their bodies and minds past any reasonable limit, who had only one thought burning in their hearts. 25 children. 25 names. 25 futures stolen. Commander Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the ESS Reckoning, humanity's new flagship, and watched the disabled Dravik fleet growing larger in the viewscreen. She was a former atmospheric shuttle pilot, now commanding a warship through sheer force of determination in 72 hours of crash training. Around her, the bridge crew worked with the controlled precision of people who knew exactly what failure would cost. "All ships report ready," her tactical officer announced. He had been a meteorologist 2 weeks ago. Elena opened a channel to the Dravik command ship. "Fleet Commander Torvan, this is the Earth Defense Force. Your ships are disabled. Your weapons are offline. You have one chance to respond to the following question." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "Do you remember their names?" Static hissed across the channel. Then Torvan's voice emerged, confused and angry. "What names? What are you?" "The children," Elena interrupted, her voice cold as vacuum. "The 25 children your harvester killed at Harmony Refuge. Do you remember even one of their names?" Silence. Then, incredibly, Torvan laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound. They were obstacles to extraction. The Dominion does not memorize the names of obstacles. Elena closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, they held no mercy. Then we'll teach you why you should have. The Earth fleet didn't fire immediately. Instead, they transmitted a data package to every Dravik ship simultaneously. It contained 25 files. 25 photographs. 25 complete biographical profiles, birth records, family histories, favorite foods, childhood drawings, school projects, dreams for the future. Asha Kamani, age 7, who wanted to be a botanist and grow flowers on Mars. Leon Torres, age 9, who collected ancient Earth music and could play 12 instruments. Yuki Tanaka, age 5, who had just learned to read and spent every evening reading to her baby brother. 25 lives, documented in exhaustive detail. 25 personalities, hopes, fears, and loves. Every Dravik crew member was forced to see them, to know them, to understand exactly what their empire had destroyed in pursuit of profit. We want you to remember them, Elena said quietly. We want you to carry their names back to your dominion. And we want you to deliver a message. On Earth's surface, the Dravik drilling teams found themselves surrounded. Not by soldiers, humanity hadn't had time to train enough ground forces, but by millions of ordinary citizens who simply stood in a silent ring around each harvester. They didn't carry weapons. They didn't shout or threaten. They just stood there, an ocean of humanity, watching. The Dravik ground crews, cut off from orbital support and faced with a population that outnumbered them millions to one, made the logical choice. They surrendered without firing a shot. In orbit, Elena continued her transmission. Your empire measured the value of our children against the worth of cryon energy and found them wanting. We're going to teach the galaxy a different mathematics. The Earth fleet opened fire. But they didn't aim at the disabled Dravik warships. Instead, they targeted the harvesting equipment that had been drilling into Earth's crust. Precision strikes turned the massive rigs into molten slag. The cryon deposits that the Dravik had coveted, worth trillions in imperial currency, were rendered inaccessible, buried under vitrified rock that would take centuries to excavate. You came for our resources, Elena said. You killed our children to take what you wanted. Now you have nothing. The cryon is gone. Your fleet is disabled. Your ground forces are captured. And you will return to your dominion with this message. She leaned forward, her words measured and final. Earth is under humanity's protection. Any species, any empire, any force that harms a human child will face the same response. We don't seek conflict. We don't want an empire. But we will never again allow our children to die without consequence. We ended our age of peace. Don't force us to show you what we learned in our age of war. The transmission ended. Around the disabled Dravik fleet, the Earth ships held position in perfect formation, waiting. It took 6 hours for the Dravik Dominion's High Council to respond. Their message was brief, transmitted on all frequencies, broadcast across 100 star systems. The Dominion formally withdrew all claims to Earth. The fleet commander and all involved officers were recalled for disciplinary proceedings. Reparations would be paid. The harvesting would cease immediately. It was, in effect, an unconditional surrender. When the message arrived, High Director Amara Lorne sat in her office in New Geneva, looking at the memorial wall that had been erected in the council chambers. 25 photographs looked back at her, children frozen in moments of laughter, concentration, play. They would never grow older. They would never achieve their dreams. But they would never be forgotten. General Kovac entered quietly and stood beside Amara's chair. The Dravik ships are withdrawing. Our pilots will escort them to the edge of the solar system. Amara nodded slowly. And then? Then we decide what comes next. We have a fleet now. We have soldiers. We've remembered how to fight. Sarah paused. The question is whether we can remember how to stop. Amara stood and walked to the window, looking out over New Geneva. The city was unchanged, still peaceful, still beautiful. But its people had changed. They had discovered that peace wasn't the absence of strength, but the choice to restrain it. They had learned that sometimes love demanded fangs. We don't disarm, Amara said finally. We never forget again. But we also don't become what we fought against. We maintain our fleet. We train our defenders. And we make it clear to the galaxy that Earth is protected, not by threats or conquest, but by the promise that we will always, always defend our children. She turned back to the memorial wall, her eyes finding Asha Kamani's photograph, the 7-year-old who had dreamed of growing flowers on Mars. We'll finish her dream, Amara said quietly. We'll grow those flowers. We'll explore the stars. We'll build the peaceful future she didn't get to see. But we'll do it with our eyes open now, and our strength ready. Sarah nodded. Peace through strength. No, Amara corrected gently. Strength in service of peace. There's a difference. Across Earth, the transformation continued. The vaults remained open. The shipyards kept building. The training centers stayed active. But now they existed alongside the schools and gardens and concert halls. Humanity had learned to hold two truths simultaneously, that peace was precious, and that some things were worth fighting for. In the weeks that followed, something unprecedented happened across the galaxy. Species that had suffered under the Dravik dominion began to resist. Worlds that had submitted to imperial rule found their courage. The empire that had conquered for 10,000 years began to crack, not from military defeat, but from the example of one planet that had said, no more. The message spread faster than any ship could travel, Earth had defended its children, and the universe had learned to respect humanity's boundaries. 3 months after the Harmony Refuge massacre, a garden was planted in the Valley of 7 Rivers. 25 trees were planted in a circle, one for each child. Beneath each tree, a plaque bore a name, a photograph, and a simple inscription. They were loved. They are remembered. They changed the galaxy. And in orbit above Earth, the warships of humanity's new defense fleet kept their watch, not as weapons of conquest, but as guardians of a peace that had been earned in blood and maintained through strength. The age of innocence was over. The age of ignorance had ended. The age of humanity's awakening had begun.